5 Live Formula One.
58 points on the table with 2 rounds left to go. A 3-way title fight that could be decided this weekend. Formula One has reached peak box office and there's no messing about. It's a sprint weekend in Qatar and we're about to get underway for the one and only practice session. Welcome along to what is going to be a pivotal few days then. It's myself, Harry Benjamin, up in the commentary box with the BBC's F1 correspondent Andrew Benson and former McLaren mechanic Mark Priestley. Welcome back, gents, and Mark, especially to you. You've been away for a while. I think it was it Canada that you were last here?
I think we've just discovered it was, which seems like an age away. I mean, just in Formula One terms, you think about what's changed in this championship since the sort of midway point around June that would have been. Everything's flipped on its head, hasn't it? Certainly with the front two, and we come to this closing point in the season with it all on the line, with the picture looking very different to the way it did back then.
It certainly has. I mean, I feel like we've only just sort of settled back from Las Vegas, and Andrew, you sitting outside the McLaren hospitality waiting for the news from the FIA, a double disqualification for both drivers. I mean, you couldn't write this script, could you?
No, it was quite funny, like people in McLaren that I know trying to not make eye contact as they walked past while I was waiting outside, you know, because they knew they couldn't say anything. Yes, it was an extraordinary evening in Las Vegas last Saturday. Feels like a lifetime ago, Harry, in some ways, doesn't it? But yeah, so they've been explaining how that happened, but it's really brought Max Verstappen back into the championship picture. But nothing changes from a McLaren point of view. Piastri and Norris still going to be allowed to race for themselves as well as the team. No team orders until one of them is mathematically out of the championship, which of course could happen this weekend.
It absolutely could. Let's just bring you up to speed then with how the standings look post Las Vegas. Of course, that gap is now not as large as it could be for Lando Norris, who sits 24 points ahead of Oscar Piastri and Max Verstappen, who are level on points, 366 apiece. They are our 3 title contenders that remain, with 1 sprint and 2 Grand Prix left to run in this 2025 Formula One calendar. The way Lando Norris can take the title this weekend is if he scores 2 more points across the weekend than Piastri and Verstappen. He cannot clinch it in the sprint race. He can only clinch it come the end of the Grand Prix if he outscores Verstappen and Piastri by 2 points. So to put it in perspective, we'll have to judge how the weekend goes, but if he wins the Grand Prix and finishes in the top 6 in the sprints, he will seal the championship. But I think, Mark, Max Verstappen and Oscar Piastri might have something to say about that, because we come to a circuit where Piastri has good form, and so too for Max Verstappen, who's in a rich vein of form right now.
Yeah, really, and out of the 3, of course, it is Lando with most to lose, so he has to be very careful, particularly around the starts of these races, sprints or Grand Prix. We saw last time out in Vegas that he didn't quite manage to get that right, and although he kind of got away with it, it did kind of cost him the Grand Prix as well. Cost him a real shot at victory, I would say, that opening lap or that opening corner. So he's got to be, it's a real balance for him, isn't it, between risk versus reward. Really, he's got to play a slightly longer game. Only 2 races to go, of course, but he's got a big picture in mind for Max, and well, certainly for Max, and that we know this is the way Max goes racing, but for Oscar as well. He's got to do something special to bring themselves really back into the hunt for a world title. So this is one you can't take your eyes off, isn't it?
How much in the mind of the team will be last week's antics with that double disqualification, the technical infringement, the skid blocks being worn away below the allowed 9mm? Is that something that will just go quickly out of their minds, or is it something that the whole team will feel the weight of at the beginning of this weekend?
Well, I think it's a good thing that it's going to be in the minds of the team, because they won't make that mistake again. You know, that was a sort of miscalculation, perhaps a number of miscalculations that led to that incident over the course of the weekend. A series of failures, effectively, but it's really sharpened the mind of everybody inside that McLaren garage. And, you know, I think what happens, and I've been in this situation before, when you come to the sharp end of a season, when there really is a championship on the line, it's easy to feel like these races are more important, or because there's more at stake, you feel under more pressure. The reality is the points on offer in this Grand Prix or the final one in Abu Dhabi are no more valuable than the ones that were in the early part of the season. It's just that if you allow it to feel that way, it can start affecting the way you behave, and that's when mistakes start to creep in. So I actually think, in a weird kind of way, the errors that McLaren made and the consequences that came about as a result of those might just be something that just brings it all back into focus for them and sharpens the mind.
Yeah, well, I mean, ironically, Mark, you were involved when, one of the, not quite the last time McLaren won the championship, because they failed to win it in 2007, but exactly that kind of scenario that you're talking about. They allowed themselves in 2007 at the end of the season to get distracted by the wrong things, which, it was two McLaren drivers at the time going for the championship, just like it is this year, Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton. Relationships within the team were very much more sour then than they are now. And there was an extra person in the mix, just like there is now. Then it was Kimi Raikkonen at Ferrari, now it's Max Verstappen at Red Bull, and they absolutely screwed up the Chinese Grand Prix, McLaren. And you were obviously in the pits when that happened, and because they just got distracted from what was important. I don't know, I still remember watching that race now, and wondering what on earth they were doing leaving Lewis Hamilton out as long as they did on those warm tyres, which led to him sliding off on his way into the pits and getting stuck in the gravel, and that opened the door for Kimi Raikkonen to win the championship in Brazil. They really need to be not thinking about making sure that they don't do that sort of thing. Now, what's interesting, of course, is that Andrea Stella, who's the McLaren team principal, was on the opposite side of that fight with you there, Mark. He was Ferrari's engineer for Kimi Raikkonen at the time, just as he became for Fernando Alonso later when Alonso joined Ferrari a couple of years after that. And Stella has talked this year about exactly those sorts of situations that he's been in, where championships have gone awry because of whatever set of circumstances have happened. And he brought up in Austin, I think it was, that you've had two situations in 2007 then and 2010 when it was Vettel in the Red Bull against Alonso in the Ferrari, where the guy who was in third place in the championship going into the final race ended up coming out of it as champion. And here is Max Verstappen. You're hearing his engine as he goes out on his warm-up lap. He's in that situation now with Red Bull. Very similar points difference to what Raikkonen had going into the final two races in 2007. So all that stuff's in their minds, I'm sure, but they have to try and not get distracted by it.
Certainly not, and you can hear the sounds of Max Verstappen, and that means we have cars out on track. And for those who wish to do a sync-up, it is coming your way now. 57 minutes and 52, 51, 50 seconds remain of our one and only practice session, because it's a sprint weekend. So once this comes to a close, we'll have a couple of hours break before we get going with qualifying for the sprints, as the Red Bulls, in fact pretty much everybody out on track with the exception of the two Aston Martin cars right now, as they head out onto this 5.4, just over 3.3 mile circuit, 16 turns, 6 to the left and 10 to the right, as the sun begins to set over the Losail International Circuit, leaving a pink and blue hue for now, which will become darkness as the floodlights will illuminate this track in full. And it's a challenging track, Mark, isn't it? But one that provides, well, for the likes of Oscar Piastri, at least a little bit more grip than last weekend certainly provided.
Yeah, Vegas had a number of issues, didn't it, that meant that it resulted in very low grip, not just, of course, from McLaren drivers, but for everybody. But it was challenging in lots of ways. The rain, of course, added to all of that. The temperatures too. Here we're a little bit more normalised. The temperatures are back up and they're high, even though they're dropping because we're heading into the evening. It's a lot warmer than it was last time out.
Free practice one just getting underway now, the first and only practice session of the weekend, because it's a sprint. 58 points on the table with 2 rounds left to go. It's a 3-way title fight that could be decided this weekend if Lando Norris outscores Oscar Piastri and Max Verstappen by 2 points. He can only do that in the Grand Prix, and let's see how the rest of the weekend unfolds. Sorry, Mark, rudely interrupted by 5 Live there. Can only apologise. Welcome back, by the way.
We'll let them off. But just talking about this circuit, we don't know yet who it's going to favour, but I would expect all of the top 3 to be strong, to be contenders. I wouldn't say this is a circuit that's going to really hamper Max Verstappen, and in terms of keeping a championship alive and going down to the final round in Abu Dhabi, that's what we want. What a good, clean fight this weekend. There are a number of points on offer with the sprint as well. There's opportunity for all of these top 3, but that also means, of course, there's a huge opportunity to get things wrong. And this championship, what you don't want to happen, we got a hint of it last time out, we don't want this championship to be decided on a mistake. You want it to be decided on brilliance. We've seen a lot of that all the way through the season from each of these 3 different drivers at different times. I hope that continues right through to the last final lap in Abu Dhabi, and it's that brilliance that decides the world champion.
Certainly, we all are hoping that for a title down to the wire. This is the sound, though, of the man in charge at the top of the championship, Lando Norris. Personal best through the first and middle sector, making his way through the triple right-hander now.
After this run, can we just change my helmet? It's some weird visor, like double vision or something.
That was Alex Albon on the radio wanting a change of visor, as Lando Norris just had a bit of a moment coming through the final corner, had to correct the car, lost a huge chunk of time as a result. His first lap time only good enough for 9th fastest. Lap times will continually improve across this session, with George Russell currently fastest for Mercedes, a 1:24.790 on the hard tyre. Everybody out there on that hard tyre. Now, we should actually give you some tyre news for this weekend. Now, we love to talk tyres, and Pirelli have given us some news to talk about. It's because they have imposed a maximum mileage limit on every set of tyres. That's going to lead to a mandatory 2-stop race on Sunday. So there's a 25-lap limit. So every set of tyres can cover that maximum length, and it's counted cumulatively across the sessions. That's a fun word to say, isn't it? So this is kind of, because we've seen it before, Mark, haven't we, and Andrew? We've seen, tyre failures, curb riding too. It's a really tough circuit, high energy as well, similar to the levels seen at Suzuka.
It is a tough circuit on tyres, and you rightly say, we've had issues here in the past, and actually they had to bring in special measures. However, it's not a surprise that we're coming here. And, knowing that we've had those issues, I think there are definitely some voices in and around Formula One that are a little surprised nothing's been done to try and mitigate against it before turning up. So, look, that's the situation we've got. And actually, a 2-stop race, maybe that might end up being something of interest as well. There's talk about maybe looking at future rule sets of Formula One where that becomes mandatory anyway. We already have one mandatory stop. Could we look at having 2? There's going to be a difference of opinion on that as to whether it will spice things up. If everybody's doing the same thing, of course, you limit the variation in strategy, and I think that's what we really want to see. Races where teams have an option to do different things. They can roll the dice by trying to run really long and have a 1-stop, which isn't really the optimum, as opposed to others gambling, making a couple of stops, fighting their way through the field. That's what spices up sport. It's having variation in the way people approach it. Unfortunately, with the mandated 2 stops, you've got everybody doing the mandated 2 stops.
As Verstappen goes to the top with a 1:23.343. Yeah, does it remove the sort of strategic fun a little bit? I mean, there are sort of kind of a lot of questions that could be asked, if the pit lane is somehow closed at some point, if the safety car ends and there's 26 laps to go and you're on an old set of tyres, that kind of throws a bit of jeopardy, Andrew, doesn't it? But this is something, if we're going to keep coming back here, that Pirelli are going to have to figure out.
Yes, I mean, look, first of all, why is it happening? It's because this is quite a high-speed circuit, and the cars run wide over the curbs, and the Pirelli tyre has traditionally, ever since it came into Formula One in 2011, has had a weakness around the outside shoulder, and that weakness is sort of exacerbated by high-speed curb riding, and the only solution they've come up with so far is to make sure they don't do too many laps on the tyre. You could argue Pirelli could do better tyres. You could argue that they could do something with the curbs. Neither has happened yet. The Pirelli tyres are better this year in a bunch of different ways, but not in this particular way. And so, for the same reason, they've upped the minimum pressures in the tyres for this weekend as well, because that gives the sidewalls a bit more support, obviously, from the amount of air within the tyre. Now, does it remove strategy? Well, no. Obviously, 2 pit stops, you've still got strategy. People will still be looking at it. Do we undercut? Do we overcut? How do we gain a position? And so on and so forth. So that it will still be involved, but you will find inevitably that people will tend to coalesce around the same sort of strategy, but then they kind of do that anyway. And what you do find, one of the sort of pluses of this, at least from a subjective point of view, for those of us who like the idea that Formula One drivers are driving to the limit all the time, it does allow the drivers to push harder on the tyres in the race than they might do if they're trying to manage them for a longer run. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I think the flip side of that was if you don't have this mandated 2-stop rule or this 25-lap maximum, you are going to get somebody rolling the dice trying to make these tyres last as long as possible, which would mean a very long stint on a set of tyres, as Andrew says, nowhere near the limit of what the car can do. And from Pirelli's point of view, you can also understand that they can't risk having failures, because much as you can advise the teams that these tyres have a weakness, one driver will still try and push the limits because they think it might give them something different which might provide an opportunity. So you can see the sides of both sides of this coin, can't you?
Yeah, and that exactly is what happened in 2021 when Sergio Perez and Valtteri Bottas in the Red Bull and the Mercedes respectively at the time both had tyre failures in the race because they were trying to extend their life, and they did it because again they were going over the curb. So that's what they're trying to avoid by doing this. But so we've got the sessions going away. Unfortunately, what we have in this scenario, Harry, we're all desperate to work out what the form is going into this race weekend, who's going to be looking competitive and who's not, particularly between the three title contenders. Unfortunately, these first practice sessions or only practice sessions at sprint events tend to give you literally no information whatsoever on that basis.
We may as well just start qualifying.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, there's a few little patterns that you get in these sprint events. One is that we know that Max Verstappen is excellent at sprints and generally does very well. One thing we also see on Fridays at sprints is Fernando Alonso usually outperforms the Aston Martin, or at least puts the Aston Martin higher than it would normally be for sprint qualifying, and that's because he's so good at getting to the limit of the car quicker than most of the other drivers. So he'll probably qualify better in the sprint than he will do for the Grand Prix itself, when everyone else has had a chance to get used to their setups and get used to what's needed for the weekend.
Well, drivers getting up to speed. 48 minutes and 27, 26, 25 seconds remain of free practice one. It's Max Verstappen with the fastest lap time currently, with a 1:23.343. Although Piastri is absolutely flying right now and looks set to go to the top if he can keep it all together coming through the final corner. He's currently in fourth. So let's just see where the man who sits second in the championship joint with Max Verstappen, 24 points behind his teammate with a championship on the line, crosses the line and does go fastest, finds 0.3 of a second, but actually lost time in that final set. So it's Piastri, Verstappen, Sainz the top three, Lawson and Hadjar the top five, with Russell, Albon, Hamilton, Alonso and Tsunoda making up the top 10. Stroll is 11th ahead of Antonelli. Hulkenberg, Leclerc and Norris is down in 15th. Just saw a lot of sparking from the floor of that McLaren that was heading down the start-finish straight a few moments ago. Ocon 16th ahead of Gasly, Behrman, Colapinto and Bortoletto 20th and last.
I was just going to reference that. The McLaren visibly running a lot lower than, say, the Red Bull of Max Verstappen. And they're obviously very different cars with slightly different setups as well. But the reason, as many people will know by now, the reason that the two McLarens were disqualified was because the skid block on the floor underneath that McLaren was worn more than it was allowed to be. That comes as a result of the car effectively running too low for long periods of time along the straight. Those sparks you see are exactly that. It's the skid block underneath wearing, and the sparks are literally material coming off that. So you look at this sprint session now, at this sprint weekend where you get just the one practice session. They've got one session to figure that out, get the car working in the right way that it can. And bear in mind, the performance comes when the car runs low to the ground. They have to find the sweet spot between getting that performance and not overdoing it, where they end up in a similar situation.
Max Verstappen just had a little wobble coming through what I think was turn 7. That's his engine noise you can hear as he goes off the track. Here's his radio.
Man, steering wheel feels really weird suddenly. I don't know what it is.
He's obviously not happy in that car with the feel he's getting through the wheel. On that Las Vegas disqualification, I think it's really interesting. Quite some information's come out about that this week. McLaren put out a statement yesterday which said as much as they were prepared to say publicly. So basically what happened was McLaren got their calculations wrong going into the Vegas Grand Prix and the qualifying and Grand Prix, because there was limited, or it was influenced by the fact that there was limited running in practice. There was some wet weather, there were some red flags in P2, and they obviously have to make a call. What's interesting though is that the issue was not so much that they were running the car too low, it was that the car was suffering from porpoising, which is an aerodynamic effect that you get with ground effect cars, where effectively the airflow stops working under the car, and it sort of stops working and then works again, stops working, works again, and the car bounces up and down at a frequency of about 5 times per second. and that ends up, it's quite a violent motion, and that ends up banging the car into the track. And that's why the skid blocks wore down more than they were expecting. And McLaren realised very early in the race that they were suffering from porpoising. They weren't expecting it. It's something, a phenomenon that was happening with these cars a lot in 2022, but has kind of gone away as the teams have understood them more. So counterintuitively, actually, it seems as if the problem wasn't that McLaren had made a calculation. Here's Leclerc's radio.
I don't feel it. Think with this faster.
Understood.
I know how he feels. My hire car that I've got on the way for this weekend is exactly the same.
You never have any luck with your hire cars.
I don't know. Anyway, it seems that, so obviously the airflow can be disrupted in a number of different ways, but it seems that what happened was they actually went a bit cautious on the setup. So the ride height has an optimum window, as they call it in Formula One, where the aerodynamics under the car work most effectively. If you get that wrong, whether it's too low or too high, you can end up with disrupted airflow, and that can lead to the porpoising. And McLaren haven't explicitly said this, but they've quite strongly hinted at it, both in what Lando Norris was saying to the media yesterday and in a conversation I had with a senior team member yesterday as well. That actually it seems like the problem was the car was a bit too high. The airflow got disrupted, and that started the porpoising, and that damaged the skids. So it's kind of weird, but it's interesting. It just goes to show how complex these Formula 1 cars are aerodynamically.
And with tiny margins as well. You know, the differences between getting that right and wrong are so small. Even the difference in how much that skid block was worn. We're talking, fractions of a millimetre between being legal and illegal. But the rules are fairly black and white with these kind of technical infringements. So the disqualification came. But still, this session is a really important one for them, as it is for everybody, with only 1 hour of running to figure out how you want to run your car effectively for the majority of the weekend. There are moments when you can change settings between the sprint and, of course, the Grand Prix qualifying itself, but this is your real only opportunity to do all the learning you want freely within an hour of sort of unrestricted running.
Kimi Antonelli is just coming to the end of a lap, which is quick enough for him to go to the top by nearly 0.2 of a second ahead of his Mercedes teammate George Russell. McLaren's woes in Vegas turned out to be big gains for the Mercedes drivers. Double podium in the end for Russell ahead of Antonelli. It was a great fight back for Kimi Antonelli last time out. Quite possibly his best race of the season. I feel like since a couple of races after the summer break, Antonelli is starting to, that form that we were kind of promised is starting to show its face now, as Antonelli's not top for very long. Fernando Alonso goes fastest.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think with a rookie coming into Formula One, particularly in this era, I think that it's going to take some time. It's a massive learning curve. It's a huge leap from where he was. Bear in mind how young he is on top of all of that. I think it's really just fair to say the expectation was probably, unrealistic in the early part of this season to expect amazing things. I know it occasionally happens with drivers, but that's incredibly rare, and it's not really a reflection of where that driver ends up at the end of his journey. I think what we're seeing is real progression from Antonelli, and that's all the team will be looking for. Really, don't forget, those driver decisions that were made ahead of this season weren't just made for this season. They were really thinking a bit longer term. Massive rule set change coming next year. A lot of the teams tried to get their driver decisions locked in early, so there's a little bit of stability, so that while you're learning a new car next year, you're not trying to learn new drivers and new team members and things like that. You're trying to build that stability early. So if they can get him on form and up and running and fully experienced after this year, ahead of the massive sweeping changes coming next year, well, they'll be in a good place.
Just hearing the sound of Max Verstappen going rather slowly and nearly taken out by an Alpine.
This is blind idiots.
That was from a few moments ago on a slow lap, and Verstappen starting to build and coming across one of the Alpines there that wasn't quite looking in its left-hand side mirror as Ollie Behrman runs out wide, coming through turn 14. Kimi Antonelli too, finding the back of an Alpine of Franco Colapinto, who's rather going slowly and dawdling on the racing line. No team radio from Kimi Antonelli on that front. But I tell you what, Mercedes, George Russell's fastest right now. He got pole here, didn't he? Last year did George Russell, after Max Verstappen had that one place grid drop. And that was a nice bit of beef, wasn't it? Like this time last year. But it's interesting. It feels like Mercedes, they're coming back a little bit in form towards this end of the season now. They're not having a say in this title fight themselves, but they could cause some issues for the McLarens and the sole Red Bull, because right now, first and Antonelli's dropped to 6th now, but Mercedes equally want to bag big points because they want to cement 2nd in the Constructors' title.
Yeah, exactly, and depending on who you are, you might want Mercedes getting involved in this. If you're Max Verstappen and you can manage to win a race, you want both of those Mercedes right behind you, don't you? We're putting a gap between you and your fellow title contenders. So I think they will still play a part in some way between now and the end of this season, because they have got a car that's really capable, and as you rightly said, they've got 2 drivers now, both coming on form. There's nothing to say they can't be in the mix. Interestingly, just to go back to what you said about Las Vegas, and it was the 2 Mercedes, they really benefited, of course, from the disqualification. In reality, there was only one man who lost out in that disqualification. That was Lando Norris, because ironically, even Oscar Piastri benefited from having a double disqualification, because the 6 points he would have lost out to his teammate were wiped out. So it was one of those strange situations where a disqualification was better than his actual result.
Everyone's a winner except for Lando Norris on that front. 39 minutes and 17 seconds remain of free practice 1. It's Russell fastest ahead of Verstappen. Hadjar up in 3rd ahead of Alonso. Sainz is the top 5. Tsunoda is 6th ahead of Antonelli. Lawson, Hamilton, Stroll the top 10. Piastri's 11th ahead of Albon. Leclerc, Bortoletto and Gasly down in 15th ahead of his teammate Colapinto. Ocon is 17th. A lot of work being done on the rear end of Nico Hülkenberg's Sauber, which doesn't look like it's going anywhere anytime soon. He's down in 18th. He scored some decent points last time out, beneficiary of the double disqualification. Got himself up to 7th in the end. Behrman 19th, and Lando Norris, having been in the pits for a little while, is now back out there, 20th and last on an outlap now though, so we'll see what Lando Norris has got to offer us. While a bit of work then is being done on the cars up and down the pits, a mixture of some still out on track and some in the pit lane. You mentioned how good a rise it was for Kimi Antonelli, who started pretty near the back. It was 18th, wasn't it, last time out. Lewis Hamilton, and just a bad weekend for him and Ferrari. He was right. He pretty much qualified last, got promoted 1 position because Tsunoda started from the pit lane, but he couldn't make the gains that Antonelli did. He managed to, he finished 10th on the road pre-disqualification for the McLarens, and had some pretty sort of choice words to say afterwards, didn't he? Which I think he has kind of tried to go back on a bit.
Yeah, I mean, look, he was hoping for a fairy tale moving to Ferrari. It's turned into a nightmare, hasn't it? He cannot wait for this season to be over. And I think, look, I wouldn't ever go to the lengths of writing off Lewis Hamilton, because he's still a supreme talent. He's one of the most committed sports people, athletes that I've been lucky enough to ever work with. But I think what we have got coming in Formula One next year, with this whole big change, massive technical changes, the cars are going to be wildly different. They're going to require something very different, both from a technical point of view but also from a driving point of view. And his hope, and this will be a desperate hope at this stage, will be that will come back towards him next year. Ever since we moved to this era of Formula One car, and don't forget that came off the back of many years of dominance for Lewis Hamilton in the previous set of regulations, it hasn't worked for him. He hasn't been able to match his driving style with what these cars required. He'll be desperately clinging on to the hope that maybe this next set of cars will suit his style a little bit more naturally.
Yeah, so the situation is that basically the cars next year are going back much more to this sort of aerodynamic philosophy that Hamilton was so successful with in the first part of his career from 2007 to 2021. In what they call step plane cars. So you've got the floors effectively flat on either side of the central chassis area, whereas these cars since 2022 they've had what they call a Venturi tunnel, which sort of starts high at the front, dips down low in the middle, and then high again at the back. And that's all about creating the low pressure that I was talking about earlier when I was discussing porpoising. Of course, they still create lots of downforce from the underbody, but not in the same way as Venturi cars. Now, these Venturi cars, basically, there's a particular way you have to drive them, and the way that the Hamilton naturally likes to drive, which is to attack the corners, very late braking, pitch the car in with the steering, balance the sort of rear, here's Leclerc's radio.
I cannot feel a thing. Really frustrating. I don't even know where's the balance of the car with these power steering.
Understood, Charles.
Yeah,
nothing we can do for now.
Leclerc is going off a lot, and Ferrari doesn't look like he's in a happy place at all, does it? Yes, so and Hamilton, for some reason, and I don't understand, because if you'd asked me who was the most adaptable drivers in Formula One before the ground effect era, I would have named 3 people, and he would have been one of them. The other 2, obviously, Verstappen and Alonso. And he's just not been able to adapt his style to the more smoother he sort of tease the car into the corners more, rely on the downforce rather than trying to create the rotation yourself. It's really strange to watch, and I'm sure Mark feels the same way, having worked with Hamilton so closely in 2007 and 2008. Yeah. But he hasn't, and of course the question is why. Is there just something fundamental that he, for some reason, can't get his head around with these cars about the way he feels the balance of an F1 car? Or is it an age thing? And actually, if you ask people within Formula 1, quite a few of them wonder whether it's an age thing, and because he is 40 after all. And of course, the next question is, well, why hasn't it happened to Alonso? I don't know the answer to that question either. But it's really interesting whether that comes back to him next year if the cars feel more familiar to the way that they did before. What we don't know, though, for next year is that they're changing in quite a lot of other ways, particularly the way the engines work. 50% nearly of the overall power of the engine is going to come from the hybrid parts of the car. And that's going to require lots of different protocols for energy management. The engines are going to be revving high through the corners. A lot of the time, the ICE, the internal combustion engine, is going to be used as a power generator for the battery, effectively. And no one knows how that's going to impact the drivers at the moment in terms of driving style. Obviously, the drivers are trying them out on the simulator. Whether that works for Hamilton or not, we're going to have to wait and see next year.
We certainly will. I do love it when Benson gets technical. Perfect for free practice one, isn't it? Just over half an hour remaining. Russell tops the session. Verstappen second. Hadjar, Alonso, Albon the top 5. Sainz, Tsunoda, Antonelli, Piastri and Lawson are the top 10, with Hamilton down in 11th and in the pit lane currently. Stroll is 12th ahead of Leclerc, who is really struggling out there. We heard him on the radio a few moments ago saying, I cannot feel a thing. It's really frustrating. I don't even know where the balance of the car with these tyres is steering.
Okay, Bottas opening behind.
I didn't know Bottas was driving, mate.
Yeah, copy that.
That's the second time an engineer has said Valtteri Bottas is on the track this year to a driver, when indeed he is not on the track. He will be, though, next year with Cadillac.
He will. So just to pick up on Leclerc, it sounds, Ferrari haven't said this explicitly, but it sounds like they're trying a new power steering system on the car. And obviously the steering wheel is one of the 2 key ways that the drivers feel the grip in an F1 car. The other one is through their bum, effectively, or through effectively their inner ear sensations. And power steering, as people, as I was kind of alluding to with a sort of slightly jokey comment about road cars, power steering can give some feel, or it can give almost no feel at all. And it feels like, or it sounds like, whatever power steering they've put on that Ferrari for Leclerc for this session is just not giving him any feedback through the steering wheel. And of course, for a Formula 1 driver, no feedback from the steering wheel is not a good thing.
No, and was George Russell had some steering problems, didn't he, in Vegas? Although I believe that's been sorted.
Too heavy. That was
too heavy
problem.
steering. Yeah, not quite the same, but certainly. Well, for those fighting in second for the constructors, you know, they're going to be wanting things to be absolutely pristine this weekend and next weekend, although the advantage is rather swinging Mercedes' way right now, with both drivers firing on all cylinders, and they have 40 points advantage over Red Bull. The one-man band, who sits third, Ferrari 13 points behind Red Bull, kind of sitting adrift in fourth, so looking tough for Ferrari to try and even get second towards the end of the year. Williams look like they're cementing fifth. Here's Norris.
Yeah, where can I find 1.6 seconds?
So main opportunities are turn 7 and turn 10, mid-corner speed.
Where can I find over 1.5 seconds is what Lando Norris has just asked on the radio. He's down in 19th at the moment. He's been out there a little while now, but his laps haven't really come together. He ran wide coming through the final corner, ran deeper in the middle sector, turn number 10, ran off. He's just about to cross the line now and shoots up, but only to 11th place.
Yeah, I think it's as much as his lap times are not impressive, as you say, the laps just haven't looked clean. He's clearly been struggling with either the balance or overall grip of that car. So this is what we talked about earlier on, isn't it? With one practice session to figure this stuff out, it's really quite tough. Great for those of us neutrals who want to see a real, interesting fight, because at the moment Verstappen right up the very front with George Russell on the top 2. The two McLarens a long way further back. So there's still plenty of time. There's a lot of this weekend to go, a lot of laps, a lot of running to be done, and as we well know, as we see Oscar Piastri do pretty much the same thing and lose it at the midpoint of a corner. With a sprint weekend, given that there is a sprint race, there's an extra qualifying session, there are still lots of laps to learn from. It's just that some of those laps really matter and there are points available for them. So learning throughout a sprint, you know, whether it goes well or otherwise, can actually affect the points haul for the weekend, unlike a practice session.
Yeah, I was watching the times and I was just looking at the McLaren drivers. Sort of Piastri was sort of bottom end of the top 10, where Norris has just jumped up to 11th when he was like down towards the back before, and I was assuming that they were doing some kind of race preparation or something like that, but that sounded from Lando Norris's radio message like he's really confused as to why the car's not quick. Obviously they've got good 3 hours or whatever it is between the end of this session and sprint qualifying to sort that out, and then again they can change the cars after the sprint from the lessons that they get from that race into Grand Prix qualifying. But not the greatest start to the weekend for either McLaren or Ferrari at the moment, it seems. One
thing I would say, and you touched on it earlier, Andrew, when you're talking about a performance window for these cars, with this generation of car, one of the features of it is that the performance window, particularly at the top end of the grid, is so small in terms of getting your car working or otherwise. And that means that things like tyre temperature, and these are elements that can be controlled by the way you drive the car, the way you've got the car set up, together with the ambient conditions and the circuit conditions, all of those things feature or feed into the temperature of your tyres, and that's the temperature on the surface, the core or bulk temperature, all of which play a part in how much grip you end up having. And a few degrees either way of being in or out of that, what they call the window where things work, can transform the performance levels from being something that's really competitive in a really tight grid to being somewhere down in the mid-pack. So it might not be that it takes very much to straighten that out and get it working, but when you're struggling, it can feel like a lifetime away.
The sun has well and truly set now over this Lusail International Circuit. We're just north of Doha, and the floodlights illuminating this 5.4 kilometre, 3.3 mile track where you're reaching speeds at over 320 kilometres an hour. Lando Norris, as you can hear, back on track, making his way through the left-hander of turn 10, where both McLarens have come a cropper over the last few minutes. We were watching for a little while Fernando Alonso, who is up in fourth, and we just saw Adrian Newey walk over from the garage and join the pit wall, and well, he's already shareholder and managing technical partner, but announced in the build-up to this week he will become the team principal of Aston Martin. He'll replace Andy Cowell, who'll move over as chief strategy officer and look after the relationship between Honda, which will be their power unit supplier, and their fuel suppliers too. Andrew, you're usually, you're in the loop way more than me, but I think this was a pretty shock move from people up and down the paddock.
Shock in one way, but not in another, in the sense that sort of last Saturday, you may remember, Harry, we broke on the BBC the story that Andy Cowell was going to leave his position as team principal and CEO, and that was because, as I understand it, a clash with Adrian Newey. And of course, Adrian was appointed by Aston Martin in March as managing technical partner, as you say, with a shareholding and eye-watering salary, with the intention that he would lead them to future success. So if Andy Cowell was picking fights with Adrian Newey, who's probably the greatest Formula 1 designer in history, then he was picking the wrong fights, basically. So making Newey team principal is effectively just recognising him as the authority in the team, which he was anyway. Why not call him team principal? What was also written in that story was that Lawrence Stroll, the team owner, had been talking to a bunch of other people to potentially come on board in a kind of senior management role. Among those people was Christian Horner, Mattia Binotto, who's at Sauber Audi now, Andreas Seidel, who was the McLaren team principal before Andrea Stella, and Martin Whitmarsh, who was the CEO of Aston Martin before Andy Cowell. Stroll's obviously not gone with any of those people for now. Whitmarsh said no. Binotto said no anyway. I think they've moved on from Seidel. Horner's still floating around in the background. And I'm told that Newey gave him a tour of the Aston Martin factory under cover of darkness earlier this week, which I did write in a story about on the BBC Sport website a couple of days ago, which is interesting. I'm a bit flummoxed by that whole scenario because Adrian Newey left Red Bull because of Christian Horner. They'd fallen out in quite a major way over the allegations that were levelled at Horner by a female employee of sexual harassment and coercive controlling behaviour, which he was cleared off twice by an internal investigation. Newey, I'm told from someone very senior at Red Bull, basically said, I can't bear to be in the same room as him anymore, which is why he left the team, in addition to some of the politics that were going on around the design of the car at that time. So it's kind of a bit weird to see the idea that they have had some kind of rapprochement. They went to an Oasis concert together in the summer.
Heals all wounds, Oasis.
Obviously, yes.
They're also, do you not think, two sort of control-hungry individuals? So how do you have them both at the top of a team?
Well, it worked for Red Bull for 20 years, didn't it? But, I mean, Horner's job, basically Horner got Newey, that was his strategy, get Adrian Newey and make the team work to optimise the use of Adrian Newey, which is something that you were at McLaren with Newey, right?
Yeah.
Which is something that Whitmarsh failed to do at McLaren. In fact, Whitmarsh tried to put barriers in Newey's way at McLaren. Set up this complicated management structure that they call Matrix. I still don't know what that means. I don't know whether you do, Mark, but
no.
Anyway, drove Newey,
so F1,
drove Newey mad, and that's why he was tempted away to Red Bull. Yeah, I mean, look, obviously the thing about being team principal is that there's a number of different ways of being team principal. But usually it requires things like press conferences, it requires things like attending sponsor events, it requires things like having media sessions at the end of Grand Prix. I can't
He's not doing all that.
Adrian does not like doing media. Well, actually that's not completely true. He does quite like doing media, but only on his terms. He's a very good interviewer, but he won't want to be doing press conferences every Grand Prix, that's for sure.
No.
And it's not a good use of the time of someone who's earning what I'm told is up to £30 million if he wins all his bonuses and add-ons, which he obviously isn't doing at the moment. So they're going to have to find somebody else to do that stuff. Temporarily, it's going to be Mike Crack, who's...
I knew he'd come back into the frame.
Exactly.
Good old Mike Crack.
Who was team principal at one point at Aston Martin, then got sort of downgraded to chief... what was he called? What's he called now? Chief engineer or something?
Something like that.
Chief of trackside engineering.
That's the point. You lose track, don't you?
Chief trackside officer.
Thank you. So Mike Crack will be wheeled out, I'm sure, to do his media sessions, which he has been continuing to do this year, it has to be said, from time to time. To take that burden off Newey. So it's interesting to see how it works out. Whether they then decide that they need a CEO figure, I don't really see why they do. They've already got Lawrence Stroll. He owns the team, he's the boss, right? So he's effectively the team principal, more or less, or CEO or whatever. If you've got Stroll as a CEO and Newey running the engineering side of the team, if you've got someone else to do the press conferences and do a bit of sponsorship here and there, why do you need another person?
I sort of agree. I think the biggest thing with all of this for me is the level of inconsistency. You know, we're coming in, as I keep saying, to this massive rule change. The very reason Adrian's been brought into that team is to get them ready for an assault, hopefully on a championship, when the rules all get shaken up next year. And yet the team and the team structure, imagine what it's like for everybody within that organisation. They've just had this revolving door of team principals and leaders coming and going, and that's not stability that they need.
Yeah, it feels like the damping is really bad on the car. Every time I'm off throttle, the car is jumping a lot.
It's Max Verstappen, who is not happy. He reported steering problems earlier on. He's just said about shift issues as well. On board his Red Bull, he is currently second and making his way through the right-hander of turn number 4, which very quickly becomes the double right-hander of turn 5 before a short blast down to a long left-hander of turn 6, picks up on the throttle. He's currently second. In the last couple of laps, Lando Norris has finally put together a lap and popped himself up into 4th ahead of Alonso. Hadjar is currently 3rd, that time holding for the time being. And could we see Isaac Hadjar after this weekend confirmed as Max Verstappen's Red Bull teammate? That's the noise we are hearing, at least from Red Bull and Racing Bulls, that they will confirm their driver lineups after this weekend. Hadjar, who's been one of the best performing rookies this year. Of course, think back to that podium he achieved in Zandvoort. Liam Lawson's put in some good drives as well, but I think has been overshadowed by Hadjar. And while we talk of Aston Martin, Mark, and will Yuki Tsunoda end up as a reserve driver there next year with the Honda Lynx?
I think it's looking more and more likely that will be the case. And you think about both of those guys, they've sort of had a go, they've had their shot, and I appreciate Lawson's shot at Red Bull was highly limited and probably not really fair to judge him based on that, but they're looking for the next Max Verstappen in this whole Red Bull program. They need to try somebody young and new, potentially exciting, and out of the four they've got on the grid right now, I'd say outside of Verstappen, Hadjar is that. So I think it's probably more than likely that Hadjar will get moved up, and I think you're right, we're probably likely to see a new youngster come in, and then Tsunoda sort of fall by the wayside.
Yeah, that youngster might well be British racer Arvid Lindblad coming into Formula One with the Racing Bulls team next year. Currently the next hot thing on the Red Bull roster in Formula 2. Has been a bit peaky though in Formula 2. He's had some standout drives, but a couple of crash-strewn races as well from Lindblad. But if you think back to Verstappen's early seasons, and he wasn't afraid of putting his Toro Rosso back then in the wall either. So often the best can be a bit rough around the edges at the start. Yeah,
and for everything we said earlier on about the sweeping changes coming in and what that might mean for driving styles and team stability and all those things, to have a young driver come in your rookie year when everything's changed, you're sort of on a little bit more of a level playing field than all of these guys that have got used to this generation of cars, that have found ways in most cases to learn how to drive them, to get the most out of them. If a youngster comes in next year, they will be joining a group of drivers figuring this stuff out for the first time with them.
This clipping out of 6 is a disaster. Just no pace out of the corner.
It's Max Verstappen, particularly referring to turn 6. That's the long left-hander that feeds you to turn 7, suffering with clipping, Andrew, and no pace for Verstappen in his words.
He says, although he's second fastest at the moment, clipping is when the electrical part of the engine runs out of energy when you don't want it to. It happens when you see the cars driving down the straight with the red lights flashing at the back. That's it. You can see that's the clipping. That's when it's recovering energy. He obviously doesn't want it to recover energy at that point. Turn 6 is the left-hander. There's a straight following it, and then the fast right-hander of turn 7. I still haven't got my head around this circuit, I have to be honest. So they'll obviously have to think of a new management strategy if Verstappen is right that that's the wrong place for the car to be clipping. Of course, it's the engineers who determine in the end what's the optimum way of getting the car around the track in terms of the energy management, and you have to manage some clipping somewhere around the lap. The question is, where's the best place for it to happen?
Getting our head around this track still. First came onto the calendar back in 2021, then had a year break while they did some renovations, and has proved to show some good racing. It is pitch black, but the sun, as it just finally sets, is producing a rather beautiful orange glow just on the horizon, with this just over 5 kilometre track bathed in light from all of the floodlights lighting up the place.
There's some great corners on this track, particularly the triple right-hander of 12, 13, 14. Really fast corners. The problem is that, a bit like Bahrain, but even worse than Bahrain, there's no references. Every single corner looks the same basically. There's a bit of track, a bit of curbs, and then some painting on the outside. That's why it's hard to sort of find your bearings when you're looking at the pictures, right?
It's interesting. I mean, that's what we have, and I'm sure if you're watching this as well with us synced up, of course, to the TV coverage. But we've had Abby Pulling in a couple of times, now no longer the reigning F1 Academy champion, but last year's F1 Academy champion, and her references are often when that wall goes from black to white, or when the sponsor board changes from Pirelli to whatever it might be. So it's fascinating seeing what the driver reference is when it might be a little less distinct, because that's what we get from these modern racetracks, isn't it? It's not quite as distinctive as Spa, or you go to Monza or Monaco.
Yeah, just while you were saying that, I was watching a lap from Lewis Hamilton. Given that we're not going for absolute hot laps right now, but he's still struggling around the lap, not looking comfortable at all in that car, not looking like he could push at all. His lap was about 2.5 seconds off, but that was a reference to Russell on the much faster tyre earlier in the session. But he's not looking happy. Both Ferraris not really looking happy so far in the early part of this weekend.
No, down in 12th for Hamilton, and Leclerc down in 14th. Let's see if their fortunes improve in this last quarter of practice, but majority confined to the pit lane for now. Only Russell, Albon's out there along with Antonelli, Hamilton, Leclerc, and the two Saubers are both out on track as well. Whilst there's a bit of work going on Fernando Alonso's car, driver guidelines has reared its head again with a meeting between the drivers and the FIA coming into this weekend about some of the overtaking that's gone on and some of the moves that have appeared in the last half of the year. And even Carlos Sainz was pretty vocal about it in the press conference. And my big takeaway is that, well, we're going to get Jolyon Palmer, Karun Chandhok and Anthony Davidson as full-time race stewards, are we, Andrew?
It's certainly what Carlos Sainz seems to want, isn't it? Karun's already said he doesn't want to give up the day job, but he's obviously very flattered by what Sainz was saying yesterday. But I think, Sainz was making a serious point. There was the drivers had a meeting yesterday with the FIA to discuss the drivers' guidelines, and as it always happens, the FIA's put a press release out about it that says very little and paints a rather gilded picture of the scenario. Basically, the drivers they feel collectively that the stewards have been getting key moments wrong in terms of assessment. One, that there's no room for a racing incident anymore, and two, that they're sometimes judging the fault the wrong way around. So one of the examples that was brought up was the incident between Sainz himself and Ollie Behrman at Monza, when Behrman was penalised and Sainz, I think Behrman was on the outside, is that right? Sainz was on the inside, and they penalised Behrman, and Sainz didn't think that Behrman deserved to be penalised, and he thought it was just a racing incident. Another example that was brought up was the three-way crash in Brazil between Kimi Antonelli, Oscar Piastri and Charles Leclerc, who was a kind of innocent victim of it. Piastri was penalised for that, for being out of control on the inside and not having his car in the right position on the entry in the apex of the corner. And I think the feeling among most drivers, and Sainz talked about this when we arrived in Vegas. It was Vegas, yeah. About how everybody thought that they'd got that completely wrong, and that they were not allowing this an understanding of the fluidity of racing scenarios to come into their thinking. And we all agreed, I think, not you weren't here, Mark, but it was you, me and Abby, wasn't it, Harry? I think we all felt that Piastri wasn't really to blame for that incident.
I did agree.
Yeah, okay. And he wasn't, even though his wheel was locked, he wasn't out of control either. He was perfectly entitled to go for that move. And it was a racing incident, effectively. But I think if people felt that if anyone had more fault than someone else, it was Antonelli. And even Leclerc said that. And because he got taken out by Antonelli after Piastri and Antonelli had collided. And most drivers felt the same way. Antonelli obviously didn't. But that's what they were discussing yesterday, and we're going to have to see what comes out of that with the guidelines when they're published early next year. I have a lot of sympathy for the drivers, because there's been another case in point was Mexico with the cutting of the corners on the first lap, and Hamilton's issue as well about gaining an advantage. So lots for them to get their teeth into, and I'm sure it was a very interesting conversation. How much the FIA will have listened to them, though, is a moot point.
Well, it's a part of, sport in general, particularly at the highest level, because, if I think about a football comparison, it's the idea of a referee making a decision. Today we have VAR, where you're trying to get deeper and deeper and more information to make sure you're making the right call. But always there's going to be a situation in sport where somebody, a referee, an umpire, whatever, has to make a judgment call. And I think as fans and competitors, we've gone so far down the line of this has to be right, this sport is, the very highest level, all this money at stake and everything else, we've got to get it right. Sport isn't always going to be right. There's always going to be an element that one person is going to disagree with someone else. And I think we need to, at some point, both from a stewarding perspective and a driver perspective, as well as being fans, you have to take a step back and go, if we want a bit of common sense applied in some of these situations, we've got to also accept that it might not always go the way of our guy, our driver, and that's just sport.
I think one of the issues that the drivers have is that they're called guidelines. They're not the driving standards guidelines. They're not driving standards rules. And the FIA say the same thing when they're talking about it. They say these are guidelines, and they emphasise that in the press release I was talking about. But the problem is they're not being treated as guidelines by the stewards. The stewards are treating them as rules. And so they're applying microscopic judgments about where someone's front wheel is in relation to a wing mirror or in relation to the other car's front axle, depending on what the exact guideline is in terms of overtaking on the inside or the outside, and applying them in the most rigid and strict way. And the drivers basically trying to say to them, look, you've got to be more imaginative than that and just think about what's actually gone on here. If we just take a step back and look at the bigger picture, these kind of came out of 2021 when Max Verstappen was driving in a way that basically everyone considered to be unacceptable, which is basically throwing his car to the apex to be judged ahead when he got to the apex of the corner, and therefore entitled, as he saw it, to be entitled to say that that's my corner. Whether or not he was going to end up off the track on the outside, on the exit. There was the first one of these meetings in Qatar was that year in 2021, after that race in Brazil, where Verstappen had done exactly that to Hamilton at turn 4 in the Grand Prix. And the drivers were all, well, we don't think that move was acceptable, and yet he hadn't been penalised for it. So it started from there, and they've gone through a couple of iterations since then. And although the press release said that the current guidelines have been approved by the GPDA, that isn't true. They were discussed. The concept around them was discussed with the GPDA, the Grand Prix Drivers Association, before they were written. But in their final, here's Lawson's Radio.
I have no stability.
Yeah,
another person with his car. They were published, having been finalised without the GPDA giving them a final look. And I had a chat with someone very senior among the drivers in Australia at the first race of this season, and he was like, have you seen the guidelines? I can't believe it. They've done something that's going to ruin racing. And so to suggest that they'd approved them was just not true.
It does feel like at times we have lost that, this is a racing incident view. But to come back to the sort of joking point that I raised and that Carlos Sainz made, but with a serious undertone about getting recent drivers to be involved in the stewarding decisions. There are drivers that make up the stewarding panel, but they're not exactly the most recent. Some of them have been there a long time. But there's a wider problem, Mark, is that this is an unpaid position for race stewards, and you therefore get a lack of consistency. Referees for football are paid. The team at VAR are fully paid. It is a full-time role. Why shouldn't it be the same in Formula One?
I think it should be the same. I think you're absolutely right. I think fans at home, if you're not aware of that, will be absolutely shocked of a sport of this nature, particularly with the amount of money being thrown around and salaries, and we're not paying these people. We're asking people to give up their time voluntarily and merely have expenses paid, and then getting so critical about the decisions they're making. It's not that none of these people are qualified and don't deserve to be paid. They do. We're asking them to do a really important job that has massive implications sometimes on championships, and all the knock-on implications of those are coming down to decisions like this. But I still think, no matter whether you pay them or not, you're probably going to end up with a similar group of people. Whether you change them, it's another story. You're going to end up with a group of people that we decide are the ones to make these really fine judgment calls. And we still have to just accept that we're going to be grumpy on some weekends because the decision didn't go our way. We'll talk about it for days afterwards, and then we'll get on with it. What we can't have is a sport where we're throwing lawsuits around, and we're starting to question legally and to bring this whole sport into disrepute because we can't accept that a decision. We want common sense, but common sense not everyone's going to agree with. That's the nature of it. It's just a judgment call. That's sport, and I think we have to accept that to some extent as well.
No, couldn't agree more. And look, Palmer will do a lot of things, but he will not work for free, that's for sure.
That's true.
Could say that because he's not on air with us anymore. 6 minutes and 32 31 minutes remaining of free practice one. A lot of drivers switching over, indeed everybody switching over to the soft tyre, and the times are changing as a result. Lando Norris fastest with a 1:29.82. Piastri fastest in the final sector, but but still ends up over 3.5 tenths adrift of Oscar Piastri. Verstappen is third, about half a second behind. Then it's Alonso and Albon, the top 5, followed by Sainz, Hadjar, Russell, Antonelli and Stroll, the top 10. Leclerc's just come across the line in 11th spot. Continuing Ferrari's rows with Behrman, Gasly, Lawson and Tsunoda, the top 15. We had a yellow flag out briefly. That was for Lance Stroll, running wide and tearing through the gravel and managing to rejoin the circuit without too much drama. Behind Tsunoda is Ocon in 16th, then it's Hamilton down in 17th, but he's on a better lap now. Hulkenberg 18th ahead of his teammate Gabriel Bortoleto and Franco Colapinto, who is just starting a lap on the soft tyre now, having just had a rather big moment coming through the gravel again and rejoining. In fact, a lot of drivers coming across the curbs and the gravel. It's tricky out there to keep all 4 wheels on the black stuff, especially for the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc.
Yeah, it is tricky. A lot of people finding it tricky, as you rightly say. We're in a phase now of this session where people have bolted on that soft tyre. These are a kind of qualifying simulation, which is why we're getting lap times tumbling, and you know, now we're getting a sort of relevant pecking order, if you like, and it is sort of normal service resumed. It's Norris, Piastri and Verstappen at the front of the field as things stand with those soft tyres on. This is now the point where you want to get your drivers and your team in qualifying mode, because that's what's going to happen next. Sprint qualifying comes later on today, is the next session back on track, so you want your driver getting out of the car in as close to the feeling they're going to have when they get back in it, when it really matters later on. So the longer runs were done earlier on, now we're in qualifying mode, and we really have got the top 3 in the championship as the top 3, all we did have until Isaac Hadjar has popped one in right ahead of Max Verstappen. So front 3 up there and thereabouts.
Hadjar shining brightly so far is the French rookie, just 21 years old. He's had 14 Q3 appearances so far this year. That's more than any driver outside the big 4 this year. He said yesterday in Media Day, I know I'll be on the grid next year. It's just a matter of where. Will he stay where he is, or will he get the promotion to sit alongside Max Verstappen? The latter is certainly looking likely, but Hadjar may be third. He's behind Piastri, who is flying right now through the final sector. Gets a face full of dust from, I think, Pierre Gasly, who had just run wide, and it's fastest in the first and final sector for Oscar Piastri, who goes to the top, just over half a tenth between himself and his teammate Lando Norris.
I wonder whether that gravel was from Norris, because Norris was on a purple lap, so that would have been fastest of all. And then suddenly, in the very last 2 mini sectors, he lost a lot of time. And Norris was, you were right that Gasly was the car immediately ahead of Piastri, but Norris was ahead of Gasly. So I think Norris obviously made some kind of mistake at the end of that lap. I don't know whether that was it, but it could have been.
Quite possibly. Norris then, not lighting up the times right now. Alonso in the Aston Martin continues to show good form, pops himself up into third. This is the sound of Carlos Sainz off the back of another good weekend with Williams. Seems to be really coming together for Carlos Sainz now after a tricky start to the year and a tricky first half of the season, really adapting to his new surroundings. Pops that Williams up into fourth. Of course, mastered those really treacherous conditions in Vegas, low grip and absolutely chucking it down with rain to qualify in the top 3 as Pierre Gasly runs wide on the exit of turn 15, flies through the gravel, and the lap time falls away from the Frenchman in the pink and blue machine. So that is a lap gone for Gasly. Sainz, though, up in fourth and really gelling now with that Williams team. And I think he said if you told him that in his first year with Williams he would have a podium in a Grand Prix and a podium from a sprint race, top 5 finish, he would have bit your arm off.
Yeah, and it's almost the opposite story to Lewis Hamilton, isn't it? Also moving teams after a long period at the team before that. So the adaptation process, as Andrew was saying, it's not just adapting to the car and the way that the car needs to be driven. It's adapting to the team, to your engineers, to your mechanics, to the way that the processes are different, the operations are all done differently at different teams up and down the grid. So there's a huge amount of adaptation. It's not to be underestimated how significant that is. And you're right, Carlos Sainz has done a wonderful job of building all season. He had a great start to the season, but it was inconsistent at times. They've now built in that consistency, and he's just progressing all the way. So they are teeing themselves up for a really strong assault, I think, next year when the rules all change.
We're just seeing confirmation as well that it was Lando Norris who went out wide out of the final corner to kick up that gravel and dust that greeted firstly Pierre Gasly and then Oscar Piastri, as Nico Hülkenberg also has a moment. That's coming through turn 5, the right-hander just has to ease off the throttle and rejoin. He's currently up in 9th at the moment and currently top 10 in the Drivers' Championship. Bit of a fierce battle going on to see who finishes inside the top 10, as George Russell is another to find track limits.
Can they? Everybody, I mean, it's not wind thing because the wind is down at very slow speed, just over a metre per second. It's not like it's gusting and causing them problems. This is about pushing the cars to the limit, which they are now in preparation for qualifying, and not finding either enough grip or the right balance in their car on a circuit that bites you when you step over those curbs. If this is a little sign of what's to come in qualifying for the sprint later on, then we're in for a bit of a treat. It's going to be chaos.
Let's hope so. We're going to be on 5 Sports Extra, by the way, all weekend, every single session, in what could be a championship winning weekend for Lando Norris. Come the checkered flag on Sunday, he cannot win the title during the sprint race, so that makes our lives easier when it comes to the maths. But if he outscores teammate Piastri and Red Bull's Max Verstappen by 2 points on Sunday, he will become the 2025 Formula One World Champion. And we have started off things fairly strongly in the end after free practice 1, and the clock counts down to 0, and it's the 2 McLarens on top, but it's Piastri who heads Norris. But did we get to see everything that Norris had running out wide on a flying lap out of the final corner? As the checkered flag waves, then it's Piastri and Norris split by just over half a tenth of a second. Alonso continuing to show good form on a sprint weekend in the Aston Martin, up in 3rd ahead of his compatriot Carlos Sainz. Hadjar looking quick out the blocks too, and the Racing Bulls is 5th ahead of Verstappen. A lot of issues Max Verstappen working through in that session. Albon makes it to Williams in the top 7. Leclerc struggling a lot in that Ferrari, managed to haul a lap time together, but 7 tenths off the pace, down in 8th ahead of Lance Stroll, with Kimi Antonelli rounding out the top 10. And we're just going to get a look at what happened to Lando Norris, and he nearly had a full 360-degree spin, just managed to save it coming out of, I think that was turn 10. But continuing to, well, not just him, it's up and down the grid, just struggles left, right and centre, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, it's a circuit that doesn't get used much, so we'll give some credit to the fact that it should ramp up as the weekend goes on. Grip levels, the sort of dust levels on the circuit should clean up as sessions roll on as well. But even so, it's the same for everybody. These are the conditions, you have to learn to deal with them, and we're seeing a lot of drivers, and these are high quality, high caliber drivers, a lot of drivers making mistakes. And as I said, I think if we're going to qualifying with this level of uncertainty, this could be a great one.
Outside of the top 10 was Hülkenberg, then Hamilton, Tsunoda, Russell, Behrman, the top 15, with Bortoletto ahead of Ocon, Gasly, Liam Lawson in 19th, and Franco Colapinto 20th and last. As we have come to a close for free practice 1, is it advantage McLaren? Always tough to get a read on the competitive order in a sprint weekend, but that's the only practice they get. We'll be qualifying for the sprint in a few hours' time, right here on 5 Sports Extra. We'll be on air from 25 past 5 this afternoon, ahead of the green light coming on at 5:30. Do join us for that. My thanks to Andrew and to Mark. We'll see you for Sprint Quali. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.